Welcome to the PR Hotline podcast, your first call for PR fixes. This is the podcast where we tackle the problems that keep PRs and marketing professionals up at night, from client chaos to career issues, and break down some of the industry's best campaigns along the way. Each week, we're joined by a different guest who brings their own honest take on the highs, lows, and lessons of working in PR and marketing. Today's guest is the brilliant Kirsty Elise Noonan, a freelance PR consultant and the founder of the Happy News series over on LinkedIn. In this episode, Kirsty opens up about the emotional toll of always being switched on, the pressure to stay reactive, and the impact of consuming bad news for a living. She also shares practical tips for protecting your mental health in this industry and brings along a favourite campaign of hers, the Unburnable book by Penguin Random House. So let's dive into it. The problem that we've had submitted for the podcast today is the constant pressure to stay on top of trending topics and breaking news across every industry can feel overwhelming, especially when the news cycle is dominated by heavy or distressing stories. It sometimes feels impossible to fully switch off, but I know it's impacting my mental well-being. So we're going to listen to Kirsty now, who's going to take us through her opinion, her experience of this issue.
Hi, I'm Kirsty. I've been working in PR for probably around 8 years now and love the creative data and just finding all the new campaigns and looking for a little bit of positivity. So yeah, looking forward to this.
So you have had a career working freelance and working with agencies. Would you say that the always on pressure of like working in PR in general is more in an agency setting or a kind of freelance setting, would you say?
I think it's that age-old little saying of it depends. I feel like it's difficult for both, but in very different ways. So I feel like if you're a freelancer, all that pressure is on you. So I think you feel that pressure to be always on. You don't want to let your clients down. You know that if you do let your clients down, which isn't usually the case, but if you do let your clients down or you kind of slip or anything like that, then it obviously falls completely on you. You've not got anyone else kind of back you up and say, no, you did really good. Like it's just the client that's thinking that or whatsoever like that. And also with knowing what's on in the news, it all relies on you as well. You've not really got that kind of circle of people around you sharing insights, sharing what's going on in a different industry that you may not actually have exposure to with your own clients that can sort of spark an idea. So yeah, I think it can be difficult as a freelancer, but also within an agency, there's a lot of pressure. And I think it's definitely kind of been more apparent over the years where people were looking for promotions. So they thought that they had to kind of like tick a load of boxes and really kind of make sure that they seemed like they were always on and always working and always doing something to kind of like impress and tick those boxes for that promotion. And again, also you just want to, I think there's a lot to do with like personal branding in digital PR. And so again, I think people always feel like they need to be doing something with their personal branding, doing something for a client, like knowing everything that's going on. You sort of, you're across so many different industries as well. And you don't get a say in those industries. Whereas if you're a freelancer, you maybe do get a little bit more say in what industries you work with because you're the one that kind of picks your client, signs a contract. So yeah, I think it can be both of them in very different ways, but I think it's sort of like even between the two of them. It's just, it depends on what you find challenging, I suppose, yourself.
I think in the same kind of thread, talking about spreading yourself quite thin, we've got so much negative press at the moment. I think lots of negative stuff with politics, with financials, with, there's all sorts in the news that's not great to read. How do you personally balance staying reactive to news whilst also protecting your mental health, especially in the current climate?
Yeah, so I mean, when I started my Happy News, which we'll obviously get onto later, the kind of main jumping off point for that was obviously Elon Musk and Twitter/X, whatever you want to call it. And me kind of moving over to Blue Sky, which is the kind of main platform I use now. I don't use X. So I think that's one of the kind of main things that I do to protect my headspace. And I would recommend for other people staying away from those social media platforms that you know it will be full of the content that you don't want to see. But also making sure that you're almost giving yourself little time slots through the day so you're not constantly in the news, because if you are, you're going to be, of course, more exposed to all these negative stories. There's things like, blocking accounts, blocking words or muting words that are to do with topics that you don't want to see. So even if you are on X, for example, you can still scroll through the feed and keep on top of current news stories, what's trending, and not have to be exposed to these really negative things that are happening. So social media, definitely a big point. Also making sure that I know the types of publications. So a lot of the time publications have certain political leanings. If you go into certain publications, you know that they'll have a certain like political agenda basically on their news feed, on their home feed. And they're usually the websites that have the big stories as well. So if you know that, say, for example, The Guardian is maybe more aligned with your political agenda, political leaning, you can go on there to find out what's going on the current news cycle rather than going to those kind of more negative ones that would maybe kind of hurt or disrupt your own mental health. So yeah, there's a few different things. Time blocking, so you're not always on it, social media, and knowing the kind of main publications that align with you, I think are my three main ones for kind of protecting that and being on top of news.
One thing that I did a couple of years ago was I removed the Apple News app from my phone and like the notifications, because I mean, I probably could have looked into it a bit more and like changed the notifications I was getting, but I just felt constantly like overwhelmed by the things that were coming through on it, and it seemed to just always be negative. There was really like one positive thing that happened every like couple of weeks, and honestly I found that amazing for me. I do think it's kind of like a 50-50. Like if you get rid of all of your notifications, then it means you can't be as good for your clients because you're not being as reactive, but it's also bad for mental health, so it's like having to weigh up those kinds of things. But you said about Blue Sky.
Yes.
I've not really had chance to like, I started putting a couple of like the newsletter bits on there and then just never ended up going back on it. How do you feel like it's a more positive platform? Like, are you happier on there, would you say?
I think so. They have options. I think it's called like labels or labelers. So you can sign up to them and they almost act like a mass blocking and muting tool. So there's basically moderators that run these and they have words, accounts that have been flagged, like all that, and you just sign up to it and it automatically just blocks all of them for you. So you can scroll down your feed and the majority of it will be cut out for you. You don't really need to go through and mute individual accounts. So it does have tools like that that are quite good for kind of blocking out that negative news. There obviously are some stories that creep through, and I think it's quite a left platform. So there will be a few stories that do align with my views, but they are probably focused on a news that I don't want to read about. So it will be in response to something that maybe Trump or Elon have done, and I don't really want to have anything to do with that. So I'll just scroll past it. But yeah, for the most part, it's quite a positive platform, I think.
I think there's a lot of PR, because I mean, again, I've not been on it in so long now. Has there started to be more of like a PR community on there, like the same? Because obviously back in the day when me and you first came into PR, like Twitter was the place to go for like communicating with people, seeing the drama and everything like that. Is that kind of replicated on Blue Sky or
I
not?
don't think so. I really, really wanted it to be, but I really don't think it has landed. I'm still holding hope. I hope that one day it will be, but I think LinkedIn is probably the place where we all congregate these days, and I don't think there's really any other social media platform that does that. But I also don't think we're ever going to get that Twitter community back, because I think we've grown so much as an agency as well that there's just so many people on so many different platforms with so many different views, and then there was so much drama all the time that I think people have just kind of like naturally stayed away from it now and moved.
Do you think, sorry, this is again going off point of what, well, not off point, but I was thinking that, do you think maybe things like Twitter had that always on, kept you in that always on thing? Because like Twitter for me when I was younger used to be the place where you caught up with like friends and stuff like that, because people were far too honest on Twitter. I mean, I know I posted far too many personal things on Twitter, but then it turned into, well, specifically for us in our industry, it did turn into something that, like, I wish at the start I'd done a separate Twitter, one that was a personal one and one that was a work one.
Yeah.
But do you think the Twitter had that, kept you in that always on kind of mentality, like you're always looking for what other agencies were doing in the evening kind of thing?
Definitely. I think if you weren't looking for like the most recent drama that was going on, you were looking for what other agencies were doing campaign wise or their tactics. And if you weren't looking at what agencies were doing directly, you were then looking for inspiration for your clients and what people were talking about in like the wider audience for your clients, like different markets, like what the next trending Netflix thing was or anything like that. Like I think it was a really, really good platform for that, but it just, I think it became too negative. So I've managed to cut it out and it doesn't impact my work. The only thing I think people kind of need it for these days is the journalist requests. But even then, I don't have to go on there now because I use that, I think it's if this then that tool, and I've got that set up. So all of them come through to a Google Sheet these days. So I never have to go on, which is quite handy, to be fair.
I only go on it because I don't even know why I go on it. I feel like it's habit. I go on Twitter. because I've had it for so long. I think it's the only platform that I've had for a consistent period of
Yeah.
time. So it's just like formed a habit. So, but I completely agree. I mean, as soon as you interact with one thing, then it ends up your whole algorithm is like negative, horrible stuff. Just because it wants that, I get like engagement from it.
So to get onto your Happy News series, you've kind of briefly mentioned it, but let's really dig in. So a few things. Where did the idea come from? Has that helped you shift your own focus away from doom scrolling? And also, how has curating and sharing positive news affected your own relationship with the wider media landscape? So I've thrown a few things at you there, but maybe if we start with where the idea came from.
Yeah. So, like I said, when the big peak of everyone getting annoyed at Elon Musk last year and kind of fleeing Twitter, I moved over to Blue Sky, and that's when I sort of was like, okay, I've got I need to see more positive news. I feel like everything that I had been seeing on social media was negative. And so I thought, I'm on Blue Sky. It's a new platform. Let me just start something new. I'll look for positive news. I do it anyway, but I don't really do anything with it. So why don't I just add one more step and just share it with people? If people want to see it, that's great. If they don't, I've still shared it and it's a nice little log for me. So that's where it came from. I think in terms of the impact that it's had on me, it's been really, really good. It's made me, weirdly, I used to go on publications and I'd be looking for the negative headlines, whereas now I'll go on like homepages of publications and I'm like, okay, where's the positive story in here? So I'm not looking for that negative anymore. I'm actually looking for the positive, which is a really nice flip. So yeah, it's definitely made me look for the positives more. So yeah, that's great. And then also it's made me aware of the publications that are more positive, the journalists that are sharing more positive news. It's made me have an appreciation for journalists that do actually go out of their way to share positive news as well, because obviously we know a lot of publications and journalists are KPI'd on the traffic they bring in and the shares and stuff. So obviously negative news does have that a lot more. So the journalists that are kind of going out of their way, or the editors that are going out of their way and giving out stories that are a bit more positive and sharing the good in the world, yeah, it's made me appreciate them a lot more.
If you were to think about the publications that you would say are a bit more positive, which ones would you rank at the top?
Okay, so there's a good mix. Weirdly, the BBC does have a good selection of positive
They're
stories.
not like a clickbaity journalism. They're like more of a factual kind of thing.
They're
So
like
I
hard
guess,
facts, good,
yeah.
like actual solid stories. They do obviously show a lot of the negative stuff, but they have a section on their website which is uplifting stories. They've also got journalists that are in like local areas and they look for local community stories, so they're more likely to share the good that's happening in communities as well. So they definitely do have good stories on there, and you also know that it's going to be legit stuff. It's not going to be like a made up or kind of like a little bit factually ambiguous
Sensational.
story. Yeah, so it's definitely a good one to use. The Guardian is also a favourite of mine just because they usually share a lot of good environmental and climate change stories. Obviously, there are some negative ones mixed in there, but they do tend to share when something new has happened that's positive in the environmental and climate industry. And there's also publications like The Cool Down, which is one that, again, focuses on like environmental, climate, stuff like that. They share across like business, technology, all types of things. And that's obviously with the name like The Cool Down, is to do with climate change and kind of cooling the temperatures down rather than raising them. So they do tend to share a few positive stories as well, and like good news and good research that's happening in that industry towards obviously helping the world. And then there are a few other, I don't check them as much, but there are a few other kind of platforms and things. So there's Good, which is like, I think they have an Instagram and a website and they share just only positive stories. There's the Good News Network as well. So there's like quite a few dedicated good news platforms. I think a lot of them stemmed from like the pandemic and people needing that positivity. So they became quite popular then. Reddit has also got its own little subreddit, which is uplifting news, and people were sharing there just positive news stories. So yeah, there's quite a few places. Like if you know where to look, it's really easy to find them. But if you're just looking at the general news, it can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming and like, oh my god, it's all negative. But there are definitely places, and when you sort of find those places, you know where to turn. It becomes a lot easier to find these positives going on.
Yeah, I obviously with the newsletter, I end up having to look at publications constantly, like every week, and like scrolling through different news stories. So what I've been doing is going on. There's a thing called Reader. Have you heard of that?
No.
And then you can filter it by keyword. So obviously, what I tend to do anyway is look at keywords for specific headlines and things like that. So what I found is this brings up like a whole feed of like news articles that have got those specific keywords. So I'm not having to go on to it and go onto the Sun and look at horrid news stories or like the Daily Mail and look at really negative things, and I can just look at the keywords that I'm looking for, and then that's kind of done. So that's a way that I've been trying to
Yeah.
have
That's
that.
quite similar to one thing that I do. I've got a sheet and I've got like similar keywords that often are related to like new research or something good that's happening on like donations and charities and stuff. And I'll go into that, but that's the Google search. I just do it like manually then. I do keep on meaning to set up like some sort of notification or email thing, so I just get them sent to my inbox. But I do enjoy just looking through them as well and being able to pick the one that I want to choose rather than them being sent to me.
Yeah.
And it is secondary to that a good way of keeping on top of what is going on in the news as well if I am looking through the websites.
Yeah.
Have you seen any trends about like times of year where you're more likely to get uplifting stories, or are they increasing, decreasing?
It honestly just changes all the time. I think weekends you sometimes get some nice happy stories just because it's like nice fluff for the weekend for the newsrooms. But no, I've not really noticed any of the trends. Obviously, you've got like your seasonal things like Christmas. There'll obviously be a few more like heartwarming, like nice Christmas community stories there. There was a really nice one to do with like a school teaching Santa's how to sign language for children at Christmas. There's like little stories like that that are obviously really nice and they're very seasonal. But I do feel like, I mean, I look for them every single day and there is a good news story every single day. The thing that I've noticed is that it's usually the big news publications that cover them first, and then it sort of like filters down to like your regional or like your really kind of niche market publications. But yeah, there's always good news, always.
Yeah. You just got to look for it. I feel like it's obviously that it's not something that will generate as many shares.
So how do you decide when to engage with difficult news stories in your work versus when to step back for your well-being? So an example would be if you're working with a financial client and you know that the new statement is going to come out, you might have to start looking in the lead up to that. Financial stories that might be quite negative, but you can make an explicit decision to spend a bit of time doing that. I guess I would link this question to what we talked about at the beginning about deciding which clients you're going to work with. Do you prioritize your well-being over your interests sometimes when it comes to the clients that might require you to look at more negative stories?
Yeah, so I feel like it's quite interesting because I think a lot of PRs will probably find that the industries that are quite fun and good to work in terms of results, like finance, do have that negative undertone all the time. So you are always a little bit torn. I think it's more than just the industry though, it's the client themselves. So having a client that is a good client to work for, that has good values, is just a nice person and a good company or a good brand does play a lot into that. If you work with a company that is negative or is even in the kind of the bad books in the media, I suppose, then obviously you're going to be seeing more even when you're just like keeping track of what coverage they're getting. So yeah, I feel like there's a few different things. One of the main things that I would say though is that industry-wise, pick something that aligns with you. If it aligns with you and you're looking after your own well-being, those two things will sort of balance anyway. Like it will just naturally happen. I think sometimes though, like especially freelancers, I think sometimes you don't have a full client roster. So you do have to sometimes make sacrifices and think, okay, I'll take on a client because I need the work. It doesn't necessarily align with me. And then I think if that happens, it's just more being honest with yourself when you have the client signed up, being like, okay, these are the topics that I know we can talk about, but this is when I'm going to look at it. This is when I'm going to work on it, and really kind of like limiting yourself and setting boundaries so that you're not constantly in that negative media cycle, looking at what's going on all the time. Like you're not checking your phone like every half an hour to see if something new that's negative has happened, or even just looking for maybe a positive story that you can create from something that is going on. So one of the things that I really enjoy doing is if you find something that's trending or you have a data campaign or you're just ideating in general and you come up with a really good idea but it's got a negative kind of stat with it or it's going to have a negative headline, what can you do to actually put a positive spin on that? So at the bottom of the content that you're writing for a client's website, can you have a call to action that's maybe adding hope? You know, if someone's reading this and you're saying everything's really bad, like this is getting worse, like everything's just terrible in this industry in this particular subject, but then you get to the end and say here's a petition where we can actually call for change, or here's these charities that are doing something really good, or here's actually a positive statistic that says that things might be changing for the better, or, you know, you're just offering a bit of hope to the reader, yourself, and then journalists as well. When you're sending that, you've got to think journalists are always getting these negative stories in their inboxes. So what can you do to stand out and actually make it a better experience for them? If probably 1 out of the 100 stories that they get in their inbox is a positive story, and that's from you, you can sleep at night knowing that you're not adding to that negative news cycle as much as maybe you could be if you'd not had that positive angle in there. So I think there's a few different things I would definitely suggest doing in terms of that.
I think, yeah, what you just said about when you're ideating and having brainstorms and stuff like that, like my whole point of, not my whole point, but something I think about when I'm doing brainstorms is how can I pit like one city against each other so it gets more angles in the press and more coverage in the press, and how can I, and then that is really negative, like when you step back and think about it, like I'm constantly looking for a negative angle because I know that's what's going to do well in press. So that also, journalists must feel like we're talking about this, but they've actually got to write the story as well and constantly write the stories, constantly have KPIs against them against getting these views and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know what my point was with that, but I just wanted to say that, yeah, it's a hard industry. I feel like the media is a very hard industry to be in.
It is. I think it's one of the things that you sign up for when you work in this industry, is that I think you've got to acknowledge the fact that you are going to be exposed to a bit of negativity.
Yeah.
There's no avoiding that. It's the media. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. I think it's how it always will work. But we do have a bit of responsibility, I think, as PRs, to make sure that we're not adding to the negativity, and we're actually either trying to neutralize it, balance it, or make it better. So yeah, I think it's definitely important to kind of acknowledge that we do play a role in what the media we see it.
You've both got a huge amount of experience across agencies, freelance. You've worked with so many clients. Is there an industry you can think of that surprised you with how negative it was? We all know the obvious few, but was there one that you thought, wow, I didn't think that it was going to be this exhausting, kind of working with these kind of clients?
Kirsty, go first.
I think it's probably, it can be both, but I think energy and like utilities and stuff, because there's obviously so much about people not being able to afford to pay their bills and to live, and you're always kind of dragged into those conversations as a brand. You're always going to be too expensive. People are always never going to be able to afford their bills. Like, that's kind of how things are at the moment with the cost of living. Like, unfortunately, unless it drops drastically, that is going to be the conversation that is always had. So I think, yeah, it is quite a negative industry, even though I think sometimes we think, oh, you could just do like a nice campaign about speed of Wi-Fi around the world, but actually it's a lot more than that, and it can be really, really negative.
I personally think it's hard to say like an industry. I will say the things, well, actually, no, I will say it. I think casino brands are surprisingly negative, and not, obviously they're negative as a brand because of who they are, but in terms of like, because it's hard to ideate ideas for them, and because you're trying to find some relevancy, you're trying to find a campaign that'll do well, you end up going more of a negative route. Like, I mean, the fact that one of my first big campaigns was based the Michael of Future Gamer, and that is negative. Like, it's literally looking at, it was trying to be angled as like a warning, if you do this then you'll end up like this, but it is negative in the long run. Like, I literally made a person look horrific so that it would get like, views. So like, I do think where it's industries where it's harder to ideate ideas, you tend to have more of a negative view.
Only industries that rely on a lot of celebrity stories are quite negative, because you're always having to be in that like Daily Mail type story. Like, they're always like shitting on celebrities essentially. And like,
well, it's like
especially...
Millie Bobby Brown calling out that journalist the other day. I think it was Lydia Hawkins or something like that, for how negative it was. And then I know that like it's also led to a conversation with Amy Lee Wood, who was like in an SNL skit, and like there's starting to be a conversation now about women. I feel like we're slightly getting off point, but I mean, like women in general being like viewed negatively.
The industry I struggled with the most, which surprised me, was a company that created products to support women who'd survived breast cancer. And I came off those client calls every week, like on the verge of tears, because even the positive stories were emotionally draining to hear about. And a lot of what we were outreaching were stories about like the impact of cancer on women's lives. And that was really, really tough, even though it's meaningful. But
yeah, I do think there is a balance between the meaningful kind of positive stories and then just more kind of like uplifting or like general lifestyle-y kind of happy, fluffy stories. I do try to kind of find a balance sometimes. I do think like sometimes when I'm looking at positive news, I'll find one and I'm like, oh, this is really, really good. But then I'm like, if I'm sharing this, there's probably something a bit more positive and not as emotionally draining, like you said, to share. And when people are just getting like my Monday roundups, 7 snapshots of stories, I don't want an emotionally draining one in there. I want them to all be that positive and someone can leave and feel a little bit lighter, I suppose.
Can you give 3 tips to anybody, freelancers, junior PRs, senior PRs, whatever it is, on how to make sure that they don't kind of get burnt out by all the negative news that they've got to consume on a daily basis?
I think limit it to certain times. Don't make sure you're going through the news constantly. Don't, make sure that you have your own time, you protect your own space, even if that's just making sure that you have an hour's lunch where you're not working and not looking at the news. Just something, a little small change. But also, if you do see positive news while you're out and about, building seeding lists, doing client research, even just on your phone at the weekend, have a little bookmark tab where you can save them. And then if you are feeling a little bit doom and gloom and you feel like you are really exposed to the negative media, just pop into there and see what good has been happening. And then if you're wanting something a little bit more positive, just search on Google or go onto Reddit, look on the uplifting subreddit and just get a little snapshot of what good is happening today, right now, or in the past week, just as a reminder that even if something good happened a month ago, you might feel a little bit down now, there is something good happening today as well.
Thank you so much, Kirsty, for taking us through that. The next part of the podcast is us talking through a campaign that Kirsty has mentioned or brought in, or we've basically seen within the press. And we're going to talk about it, dissect it slightly, and basically see how it's had an impact on the PR community or any ways that we'd make it better. So Kirsty, tell us what campaign you've brought in.
Yes. So my campaign is the Unburnable book. It was done a couple of years ago, so it's not too recent, but I think it's still as relevant now as it ever has been, to be fair. It was basically a campaign by Penguin Random House where they got Margaret Atwood, who is the author of The Handmaid's Tale. If you don't know, it's quite a dystopian, slightly scary for women story that some people are speculating is coming true today. So that's why it's quite relevant now. But basically, it's a book that has been on many banned book lists. It is almost always in the top banned books every single year in America. And it is banned in lots and lots of countries around the world for the content and the story. So basically what Penguin Random House did is they acknowledged that. They got Margaret Atwood to come in and they basically printed a copy of her book, The Handmaid's Tale. They made it with like flame retardant pages, like materials. Even the ink was fireproof. The whole entire book is unburnable, as is the name of the campaign. So they did that, and then they got little Margaret Atwood, who's, I don't know how old she is. I want to say she's like 70, 80.
Yeah, she looks like a little cute old grandma.
Yeah, she's not in her teens anyway. They got her and they did a really dramatic and really, really impactful video where she comes into the camera and the scene and she's got a flamethrower and she's there with the flamethrower on the book, proving that it is unburnable and it's her own book. And obviously it's quite a big thing. Like, authors don't burn books, people don't burn books. Like, it's a big topic.
Yeah.
So yeah, to have her there is quite a really strong image, burning her own book and proving that it's unburnable. And then alongside this, they then said that they were going to do an auction for the Unburnable book. The money from the auction was going to go towards PEN America, which is a organisation that basically fights censorship, and it raises awareness of book bans and what is happening in the kind of literary world. So yeah, they did that. I think the auction raised $130,000, which is really, really good as well. But yeah, this happened a couple of years ago and it's just as relevant now, and I think it's such a strong campaign.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it up is because it has that positive kind of hope spin on it. It's not just saying books are getting banned. They made a not light-hearted, but quite an impactful but different video to go alongside it to really grab attention and show what's happening in a different way. And then they also then ended it with that little thing where they said there's going to be a donation made. So you're not just kind of throwing a load of negativity on someone and saying books are being banned, but we're not going to do anything about it. They're saying books are being banned. Here's what we are doing to fight that for you, for the rest of the world, for people in America. And we're going to donate to a charity, an organisation that fights that as well. So we are doing something, change is happening, and you're not alone in being against book bans. This whole group of people that are doing good, basically. So yeah, I think it's a really good way of putting a positive spin, or like a slightly more hopeful and uplifting spin on something that could be quite negative otherwise.
From a purely cynical point of view, obviously I think it's a fantastic campaign, being anti-censorship, especially in the current climate we have at the moment in the US around censorship, around race, gender, sexuality, all that kind of thing. If I ignore all of that and just go purely cynical, it had almost no media spend. It was a very cheap campaign for them to run, and what I could see, it garnered 3.5 billion impressions. So from a media spend perspective, it would cost about 35 million to bring in that many impressions usually. And they got that for basically for free with very little advertising. I think it was a hugely successful campaign without even taking into account what a positive campaign or message it had. And I think that really shows how much people are crying out for these kind of campaigns and how they're willing to engage with these kind of campaigns. And I think that's a great lesson for the media companies when thinking about the kind of campaigns they want to run. Yeah, your negative campaign might get you a few clicks in the Daily Mail, but these real impactful campaigns are the ones that are actually going to have the financial payoff.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I agree that it's a campaign that will go away with people, and like it'll impact you, it'll make you think again. Because like I still think it's crazy that we have book banning, that we have censorship like that. Like that's doesn't feel like we're in the right kind of century for that, not century, decade for that to be happening. And I think it's even more relevant now that Trump is back in and now he's like banning books over and over again, that this is again more relevant. So it's like it's I hate to say it, an evergreen thing, because it's a topic that is going to constantly keep coming up, because there's always going to be these horrific political figures that come into play and think they have the power to do stuff. And I just find it crazy that Handmaid's Tale is like such a banned book. Like it's
PEN America actually themselves release a list every year of the most banned books and like challenged books in libraries, and yeah, it always comes up near the top, and it's absolutely wild what some of those top books are. And the fact that we even have to have these lists in the first place is just wild. But it's good to kind of raise awareness and let people know, and kind of it helps create these conversations that we're having, saying like, how crazy is this?
Yeah.
And it also shows, I think, this campaign having that kind of hopeful element to it. If you do want to have a positive campaign, you don't necessarily have to just kind of focus on the nice, fluffy topics. You don't have to stay away from these kind of more hard-hitting and serious topics. You can do them. There's just a certain way of going about them. And like you said, there is an appetite for them. People do want these stories, and it just proves with how much attention this got at the time. And again, you said as well, it's still relevant today, and I think they even could come back with it again and create maybe a line or a little collection of these Unburnable books, doing it based on not just The Handmaid's Tale, but some of the books in PEN America's top 10 or top 20, for example, and people will buy them because it is such a big issue, and people do go against banning books. And so I do think they could sell more of these, or do auctions for more of these, or do a big collection and auction that. And then again, that would be more money towards fighting against this censorship. So it's definitely a campaign that could continue on. Like, it doesn't have to stop where it did. And like I said, it is a few years old, but it's definitely got legs still to make an impact today.
I think that would be my criticism is too heavy of a word, but kind of if we were to look at the campaign and think what could be improved, I think I agree with you. That's what I would say. We've talked a lot about it being evergreen, but I don't think PEN America have really taken advantage of that and continued to sustain its initial impact. I think there are initiatives that they could have taken to maintain that momentum. And Margaret Atwood actually Googled is 85, so I don't think dragging her out into public to set fire to books is really the best way to do it. But your idea, Kirsty, about finding other frequently banned books and engaging their authors, I think could also make it more global if the campaign reached beyond English-speaking audiences and looked at frequently banned books in other countries, kind of incorporated multilingual elements to kind of enhance that global impact. I think that would be one way to improve the last campaign.
Handmaid's Tale has come out a couple of weeks ago, so again, it could have even been a relevant campaign to go again for it. But
definitely.
Just to wrap up, I will include on screen a picture of Margaret Atwood with the flamethrower, because as much as it's a very serious topic and I love the campaign and everything like that, it is an iconic picture.
I do think that's part of the beauty of it, though. Like, it's not just like a boring text-based like blog post saying here's the banned book and what we've done. Like, it's got like visuals and it's a little bit different. So that's how it's capturing attention as well. Anyone could have created a blog post, but they've gone out and done something a little bit different, which is how it's captured attention so much.
Did you see it when it first happened, or have you seen it in?
Yeah, saw it when it first came out. So yeah, and annoyingly as well, from a digital PR perspective, I'm pretty sure the landing page is gone. So that's links lost, which is very upsetting. You have to go on Wayback Machine if you want to see like the original landing page, which is very, very good and very, strong as a landing page. But yeah, one thing, if anyone from Penguin Random House is listening, get that back up.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kirsty, for coming onto the podcast. We've learned a lot. I feel like this is a great campaign to talk about, and you've talked about some really, I think, like hard-hitting things about the industry as well. Like, there's a lot of things that I'm probably going to go away from now and have a think about, like the amount of media I consume and everything like that. So I think it's a really important topic that I think more people need to talk about and set those kind of boundaries for themselves. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.